Today we're going to be talking about the Werewolf Den in Curse of Strahd and giving you an opportunity to bring back that Tarokka deck. Even as a self-titled dog person, I didn't really care for the Werewolf Den. There wasn't a lot there. It was a whole bunch of shallow characters, all of them are evil, and you're not left with any meaningful choice. You either side with the current evil leader that likes to kidnap children and make them fight to the death, or you side with the future evil leader who just wants to kidnap children and turn all of them. It's not really much of a decision. In fact, I think most people just end up slaughtering all the werewolves and going along their merry way. I wanted to have it be more, like all of the other chapters. So today we're going to grab our shovels and we're going to add some depth. The first thing that we're going to do is change up some of the pack's history and their name. They're no longer the children of Mother Night. They are the Night's children. This is a name that the Barovian people gave to the pack a long time ago, hundreds of years before Strahd even arrived in the valley. The pack has been here for ages and ages and ages, and they were flourishing before the mists came. When the mists did come, they got screwed over just like everybody else. Their hunting grounds shrunk dramatically, their pool of food disappeared almost overnight. They ended up subsisting on forest game just like everybody else. In more recent history, the pack's previous leader, good old Skenis, was content to leave things pretty much as they were. They lived in harmony with nature, they stayed out of Strahd's way, and everybody was, well, not happy, but they were at least alive and fairly content. And then Kiril stepped up and challenged Skenis for leadership. Skenis at the time was pretty old, so he didn't want to deal with all of that. He just stepped aside and let Kiril take the reins. Immediately, Kiril decided that he was going to pledge allegiance to Strahd, and eventually Strahd let them outside of the mists, and they began to kidnap children as written and force them to fight to the death. The survivor became a werewolf. Not everybody agreed with this strategy. In fact, I'd say that most of the werewolves found it pretty abhorrent, but they kept quiet, out of respect for Kiril's rank as alpha and out of fear of Strahd himself. Now, that is except for one werewolf, Emil. He alone stood up and said, "This is enough. I will not stand for this." And then, as written, they carted his ass off. But not to Castle Ravenloft. We're changing that up. Instead of Castle Ravenloft, Emil is being held in Zuleika Pass. You know, in that big tower that has absolutely nothing else of interest in it. That's where he is now. It's cold, and he's wrapped up in silver chains on the top floor. He's not having a good time, but at least Zuleika Pass is a little more interesting now. With that alternate history out of the way, let's take a look at the areas inside of the den that we've changed up and the people that your party will find there. First up is Area Z2, the guard post. Now, just as written, there are two werewolves here guarding the entrance to the den, Asiana and Devanka. The module says nothing about these werewolves aside from their names, so we're going to fill in their history a little bit. Asiana is an older teenager. She's surly and distrustful of strangers. She is, in fact, one of the first, if not the first, kidnapping victim of Kiril's new recruitment strategy. She's been here for several years, and it's not been a great time for her. She was actually raised by Devanka within the pack. Devanka is a middle-aged, natural-born werewolf who holds no love for Asiana. In fact, she finds the kid kind of annoying, to be perfectly honest. Devanka's not really a nice person. In fact, she's a Kiril loyalist, and she'll fight to the death to defend Kiril if necessary. Now, when your party first approaches the den and they are sighted by the guards are not going to call the cavalry as is written in the module. Instead, each guard has a little handbell that's near them, or maybe they use bird calls, whatever your preference is. When they see the party, they'll ring that handbell twice. That is going to alert Skenis in Area Z3. At that point, Skenis is going to come out, and with the two guards, they're going to basically interrogate the party. And they're going to figure out why they're there. Why are you coming to the den? Who are you, and what do we need to do to get you to leave? Now, The werewolves are secretive. They're not necessarily bloodthirsty murderers all the time, but they don't want to be figured out. So at no point during the conversation is any one of the three going to admit to being a werewolf. Instead, they're going to pretend to be societal outcasts from Vallaki or Krezg or whatever. They've come here to live away from the rules of the burgomasters and, damn everybody else. And hopefully that's enough to dissuade your party. It's not going to be, but that's the story that they're going to put forth. The only way that your party is going to be let in through the front door of the den without a fight is by being infected with lycanthropy or by being escorted by another member of the pack. Barring that, no entry will be given. If at any point the guards feel like they're in danger, they'll ring that handbell 3 times. That is what's going to call the cavalry. Every werewolf within hearing distance is going to come in charging to the aid of those guards, and your party's going to have a pretty bad time. But don't worry, there are other ways into the den, and we're going to cover one of those coming up in just a little bit. Before we get to that, if you want a written version of this guide, you can check out our Patreon in the description down below. All patrons pledging at least $1 get written guides past, present, and future to download and keep forever. Go ahead and check that out. If you don't want to do that, click the subscribe button over here, and we'll see you back here for the next video. Next up, we have Area Z3, the Wolf Den. This is where Skenis is going to be if he hasn't been called off to Area Z2. Not a whole lot has changed in this area aside from Skenis himself. Now, Skenis, as I said earlier, is the previous pack leader now. He's not just some random old guy sitting around in the den playing very bad music. In fact, he's playing some pretty decent music. He's had a lot of practice because that's basically all he does these days. He plays music and he gives advice to anybody who's going to listen. The good thing about that is most people tend to listen to Skenis. His opinion carries a lot of weight within the pack. So if your players can get on his good side and convince him that rising up against Kiril Stoyanovich is a good idea, he could probably bring more than a few pack members with him and prove to be a very, very good ally to have. On to Area Z4, the underground spring. This is your alternate entrance into the den. The fissure in the ceiling is wide enough to squeeze through. And if your player characters are exploring the areas around the den, they're going to find that fissure with a successful DC 17 perception check. Or alternately, they can find it with a passive perception score of 13 or higher if they're just meandering about. So this alternate entrance combined with the one that's already up top in Area Z8, I think it is, should provide sufficient alternate means to get into the den without slaughtering the guards. Next up, we have Area Z5, the Deep Caves. As written, this place is disgusting. There's bones and filth everywhere, and it's just, ugh. But we're not going to do that. This pack has been around for a long time. They keep things neat and tidy. They bury their waste a long way from the den to keep the smell down. A smell like that would attract a lot of undue attention, and they're not going to do that. So this whole area, Z5, is pretty neat and tidy as far as caves go. Next up, we have Area Z5A, the South Caves. This is where Kiril's mate Bianca spends her time. If your players are wandering around the den without an escort, then Bianca's going to be hostile the moment that she sees them. She's going to attack them and call for reinforcements. If, however, they're accompanied by Skenis or Zuleika or some other pack member, she stays her hand and she's willing to make impolite conversation. You see, Kiril's station as Alpha has given Bianca an inflated sense of self. She loves to lord her position over everybody that she sees as inferior, which just happens to include everyone. So any conversation with Bianca is going to be a little unpleasant and hopefully a lot of fun to run. Next, we have Area Z5B, the North Cave. This is where Wencencia, or Wenny for short, spends her time taking care of Kellen, the pack's newest initiate. After killing all of the other initiates, Kellen has become nonverbal, and Wenny has been charged with making him snap out of it on threat of further violence against both her and Kellen. It's not a great situation for them. But Wenny has really come to care for Kellen quite a bit, almost as a second mother. Wenny's maternal side comes from the fact that her own child, Beryl, was killed many years ago by a wolf hunter. In fact, the same wolf hunter that you find in Vallaki, Zoldar Zoldarovich. If the players aren't openly hostile towards the werewolves, or they seem fairly friendly, Wendy will actually approach them and ask them to help bring that wolf hunter to justice. She doesn't know his name, but she can describe him by his looks and his smell, and she knows that he lives in Vallaki. So what your party does with that? Entirely up to them. Alright, here we are at Area Z6, Kiril's Cave. The only change that we made to this area was the addition of an iron-banded chest on one of the walls. It's locked, and Bianca carries the key when Kiril's not around. It can be opened, however, with a DC 15 dexterity check and some thieves' tools. Inside is a potion of Hill Giant's strength and 50 gold pieces. Both of those were a reward from Strahd for Kiril's loyalty. In the event that Kiril's leadership of the pack is ever challenged, he plans to drink the potion and lay the smackdown on somebody. Now, in addition to those items, there's also a shrunken head, a wolf's tooth, and a werewolf plush toy with "Is no fun, is no Blinsky" written on the tag. Here we are in Area Z7, the Shrine of Mother Night. Now, this was the big change in the den. Despite the name of the room, we're actually taking the shrine out, and the treasure trove, and the 2 rotting corpses that are infested with maggots, because, you know, gross. But aside from being gross, the whole shrine enshrines the pack as this bunch of evil, shallow characters that can't be related to, and absolutely must be stabbed in the face. And we want them to be more than that. We want them to be relatable, 3-dimensional characters that your party can interact with. So we're going to get rid of all that Mother Night hullabaloo. If you've got an item that is placed here by the Fortunes of Ravenloft, feel free to put it in Kiril's chest, maybe under a false bottom. In addition to removing the shrine, we've added 2 new cages. There's a large wooden cage and a large iron cage. In the wooden cage is a man in tattered servant's attire. His name is Halik. You might recognize that name as the valet from Wachter House in Vallaki. Same guy. In the large iron cage is Annika. She is a female werewolf of the pack who is being starved. She's emaciated and she's in hybrid form and she's bound up in chains. She's frothing at the mouth and just not doing really good right now. About a year ago, Annika met Halik in Vallaki. She was there on some trip or some whatever, and they hit it off. They eventually started seeing each other again and again and again, Annika sneaking out of the den every time, and they fell in love. They planned to run away together and start a life on a farm somewhere. Annika never told Halik what she was. She planned to at some point in the future, but it was just never the right time. Kiril got wind of the 2 lovers and eventually started having them followed. When it became clear that Annika wasn't going to kill and eat Halik, and when he found out that she planned to leave the pack, Kiril had both lovers captured and brought back to the den. At this point, Kiril is starving Annika to the point of insanity, and he plans to have her eat Halik at some point before reinstating her into the pack at the lowest possible level, just for humiliation's sake. When your party first enters the area, they're going to notice a figure kneeling in front of the cage. A perception check of 10 or higher will let them know that the figure is actually handing food through the bars and feeding it to the werewolf Annika. This figure is, of course, Zuleika, who, if she notices that the party is around, is going to jump up, spin around, and confront them. Obviously, she's not supposed to be doing what she's doing, and she doesn't want to get caught. Now that we've got those areas out of the way, let's talk about the special events that we've added to the den. First up, we have Esmerelda's Hunt, which is kind of like Aragel's Hunt from Argynvostholt. This works great if your party hasn't met Esmerelda yet, or if she's not their fated ally, and she's just some NPC in Barovia. Here, she's been hunting around the area of the den for a few days. She's trying to track down the werewolves to their den and basically murder them all, okay? She's a monster hunter, and she's got a real sore spot for werewolves after one of them bit off her leg. So, yeah, it's a thing for her. But in addition to that, she wants to rid Strahd of his allies. She wants to weaken him, and she's gotten wind that the werewolves are working for Strahd. So it only makes sense. If your players run into her, then she asks them for help. If they refuse to help, well, she's none too happy about that. She gets kind of angry. But if your party can suggest a different way of dealing with the werewolves than killing them, maybe, then her anger is assuaged. Or, you know, they can just run with it and murder all the werewolves. It's entirely up to them. Player agency and all that, you know? Our next event is called Only Fools Rush In. Some of the farmers in Krezk have been experiencing some thefts of their crops or of their livestock, and they've been seeing some dark shapes on all fours running around their farms. Now, one of the farmers, Stefan Moscovici, has convinced everybody that these are werewolves that are doing all of this. They're sneaking in and they're stealing all their stuff. Well, in reality, it's actually the mongrel folk from the Abbey. They're stealing the crops and livestock to make up for the meager harvests of the Abbey's tiny little garden. But werewolves are the ones that get the blame. So Stefan has rallied up several other farmers, and they're out for blood. They've got their pitchforks, they've got their torches, and they're tromping around the forests around Lake Baratok. They're getting dangerously close to their goal of the Werewolf Den. Your players can run into the roving band of farmers either to or from the den at your discretion, and they can try to convince them to go back to Krezk. Because let's face it, if these farmers run into the den or they are found by any roving pack of werewolves, they're going to get torn to pieces. If they do get torn to pieces, Krezk is going to have a bit of a shortfall on some of their harvests this next winter. Last but not least, we have Zuleika's plot. This is where your Taroka deck is going to come in handy. Now, you see, Zuleika hasn't been idle in her time guarding the prisoners and handing them food on the sly. She's been plotting how to break Emil out of wherever it is he's been taken. She has no idea that he's been chained up in Zuleika Pass, but something inside of her says that he's alive and he's somewhere in Barovia just waiting to be found. So when she encounters your party inside the den, and they're not overly hostile and murdering everyone, she's going to ask them for help. Alternatively, Zuleika can actually leave the den and find the party on her own to ask for help. If she does this, she's going to approach the party cautiously, just in case they want to just murder her, okay? But if they do agree to help her, the first thing that Zuleika is going to do is suggest a Tarokka reading from one of the local Vistani. This is going to be either Madame Ava or Esmerelda herself. If it is Esmerelda, Esmerelda's not going to be terribly happy about it, helping a werewolf and all. But despite her grumbling and groaning and, you know, whatever, she'll ultimately acquiesce and do the reading for you. Your Tarokka reading is going to consist of 3 cards in this case. The first is going to be the Beast, the second is the Torturer, and the third is the Soldier. The Beast, of course, represents the relationship between Zuleika and Emil. They're both werewolves, so what else would it be, right? The second card represents what's happening to Emil. He's in great pain, great danger. He is in fact wrapped up in silver chains and being held captive at the top of the tower in Zuleika Pass. The third card represents where he's at, which, like I just said, is Zuleika Pass. Somewhere high up, somewhere remote, somewhere very cold, and under the watchful eye of unmoving soldiers. Now, those are, of course, the statues on top of the guard tower. What are your players going to do with this? Well, I don't know. But I'll tell you what they're not going to do. They're not going to rush headlong into Castle Ravenloft and flip and die just to save a single werewolf. And they're going to have a lot more fun, I think.